I still remember the exact moment my world shifted, though I didn't realize it then. It was my 10th birthday, and I was sitting cross-legged on our living room floor, clutching the handmade quilt my grandmother had just given me. The fabric was soft against my skin, each patch telling a different story, pieces of my baby clothes, my first Halloween costume, even a snippet from the dress I wore to my first day of school. My name is Ria, and that birthday marked the beginning of understanding what it meant to be the forgotten child. Open mine next, Jasper. My mother's voice rang with excitement as she thrust a wrapped package toward my 6-year-old brother. Never mind that it was my birthday party. Jasper tore into the paper with the enthusiasm only a spoiled kindergartner could muster, revealing a brand new Nintendo gaming system. This is amazing. He bounced up and down while my father beamed. Can I set it up now? Of course, champ, Dad said, already moving toward the television. I'll help you. I pulled the quilt tighter around my shoulders, breathing in the familiar scent of my grandmother's lavender perfume. Grandma B caught my eye from her spot on the couch and gave me a knowing wink. Come here, little bird, she said, patting the space beside her. Let me tell you about each piece of this quilt while the boys play with their new toy. I climbed up next to her, grateful for the escape. My grandfather Walter squeezed my hand as he passed by, heading to the kitchen for more coffee. The weight of the quilt felt like a shield, protecting me from the squeals of delight coming from Jasper as Dad helped him connect the gaming system. This blue patch here, Grandma B whispered, is from the dress you wore when you learned to ride a bike. Remember how proud you were? I nodded, tracing the familiar pattern with my finger. You and Grandpa were there. And Aunt Lorna took pictures. That's right. Your aunt nearly crashed into Mrs. Henderson's rose bushes because she was so focused on capturing your first successful ride. From across the room, my mother's voice cut through our moment. Ria, don't you want to watch Jasper play his new game? He's going to let you have a turn. How generous of him, Aunt Lorna muttered from her perch by the window, to share his new toy at his sister's birthday party. My mother's smile tightened. Lorna, please. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Aunt Lorna stood up, her tall frame casting a shadow across the room. Walter, want to help me bring out the cake? Before we completely forget whose birthday we're actually celebrating, I watched my aunt stride toward the kitchen, her spine straight as an arrow. My mother's face flushed red, but she said nothing, turning back to coo over Jasper's progress in his game. Grandma B squeezed my shoulder. Your aunt has always had a fierce heart, just like you. Now let me tell you about this yellow patch. This one's special. But before she could continue, Dad's voice boomed across the room. Celeste, honey, come look. Jasper's a natural at this game. He's going to be just like his old man, good with his hands, perfect for taking over the repair shops someday. I felt Grandma B.A.'s grip tighten slightly on my shoulder. The room suddenly felt smaller, more suffocating, despite the quilt's comfort. I watched as my mother hurried over to join them, completing their perfect little triangle around the television screen. Your story matters too, little bird, Grandma B whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. And someday they'll realize what they've been missing all along. I nodded, but something cold and hard had settled in my chest, right next to my heart. It was the first time I truly understood that in my father's eyes I was just a shadow, a placeholder for the son he'd always wanted. What I didn't know then was that this realization would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. And it all started with a quilt, a Nintendo, and a birthday party that wasn't really mine at all. Call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after my birthday. I was sitting in math class, doodling flowers in the margins of my notebook, when the principal's voice crackled over the intercom. My Aunt Lorna was waiting in the office. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw her face. Aunt Lorna never cried, but her eyes were red and swollen. She grabbed my hand as soon as I walked through the office door. There's been an accident, she said, her voice barely holding steady. Grandma B and Grandpa Walter. The rest of her words faded into a hollow buzzing in my ears. I clutched my backpack straps so tight my knuckles turned white, the weight of my grandmother's quilt inside suddenly feeling like lead. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Aunt Lorna kept reaching over to squeeze my hand, but neither of us spoke. When we arrived, my parents were already there. Mom was crying quietly in a corner while Dad paced the waiting room, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, I understand the shops need managing, but this is a family emergency, he was saying. I'll be there as soon as I can. Jasper sat alone in a plastic chair, looking smaller than his 6 years. For once, nobody was paying attention to him. He looked up when I walked in, his lower lip trembling. Rhea, he whispered. Are Grandma and Grandpa going to be okay? Before I could answer, a doctor appeared in the doorway. The look on his face told us everything we needed to know. The next few days passed in a fog of black clothes and casseroles. People kept patting my head and telling me how sorry they were, but their words felt empty. The only real thing was the quilt wrapped around my shoulders, the last gift Grandma B would ever give me. The funeral, Dad stood at the podium and talked about family legacy and the importance of carrying on. He barely mentioned Grandma B.A.'s stories or Grandpa Walter's terrible jokes. It was all about business and tradition and the future of the Parker name. Your father always did miss the point, Aunt Lorna muttered beside me. She squeezed my shoulder. You okay, little bird? I nodded, though I wasn't. Not really. Across the church, I watched my mother dab at her eyes with a tissue while simultaneously trying to keep Jasper quiet with his handheld game. After the service, everyone gathered at our house. I escaped to my room, but the sound of voices still carried up the stairs. Dad was talking to Uncle Robert about the repair shops again. The timing couldn't be worse, I heard him say. We're expanding to 3 new locations next month. Jasper's legacy is at stake here. A sharp laugh cut through their conversation. Jasper's legacy? Aunt Lorna's voice was razor sharp. Your son is 6 years old, Everett, and your daughter is right upstairs, grieving the only people who ever really saw her. Now isn't the time, Lorna. When is the time? When Rhea's completely invisible. When she's given up hoping for your attention entirely. You have no right. I have every right. They were my parents too, and unlike you, I actually knew them. Did you know Mom spent the last 3 months making that quilt for Rhea? Or that Dad taught her constellations every Friday night? The silence that followed was deafening. I pressed my face into the quilt, breathing in the fading scent of lavender, trying to hold on to the memory of Grandma B.A.'s voice. A soft knock at my door made me look up. It was Jasper, clutching his gaming device. Can I sit with you? He asked quietly. Everyone downstairs is fighting. I nodded, lifting the edge of the quilt. He crawled under it with me, and for the first time I didn't feel resentful of his presence. We were both lost in the same storm. I miss them, he whispered. Me too. Below, I could still hear Aunt Lorna and Dad arguing, their voices rising and falling like waves. But something else was building underneath, a quiet determination taking root in my chest. Grandma B had always said I had a fierce heart, just like Aunt Lorna. Maybe it was time to prove her right. 2 months after the funeral, I found Aunt Lorna sitting on Grandma B.A.'s front porch, clutching a piece of paper. Her hands were shaking. They're selling the house, she said before I could ask. Your father's already listed it. The world tilted sideways. This house was my sanctuary, filled with memories of weekend sleepovers and midnight stargazing sessions with Grandpa Walter. The garden where Grandma B taught me about herbs. Kitchen where Aunt Lorna would sneak me cookies before dinner. He can't, I whispered, but we both knew he could. As executor of the estate, Dad had full control. He says it's the practical decision. Aunt Lorna's voice dripped with bitterness. Apparently, maintaining a family home isn't as important as expanding his precious repair shops. I sank down beside her, my grandmother's quilt wrapped around my shoulders like armor. Where will you go? Aunt Lorna had lived here for years, helping care for my grandparents. This wasn't just their home, it was hers too. The screen door creaked open behind us. Lorna, we need to discuss the timeline for vacating the property. My father's voice was all business, like he was talking to one of his employees instead of his sister-in-law. Aunt Lorna stood slowly, her spine straightening. Vacating the property? Is that what we're calling it now, Everett? Throwing me out of my parents' home? Don't be dramatic. The market's hot right now and the business needs. The business? And Lorna whirled around. Mom and Dad's house isn't your personal piggy bank. This place was meant to stay in the family. And what family would that be? Dad's voice turned sharp. You're not even their real daughter. They took you in out of pity when your parents died. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the color drain from Aunt Lorna's face. How dare you, she whispered. They loved me like their own, which is more than I can say for how you treat your daughter. Dad's jaw clenched. Leave Rhea out of this. Why? You do. My mother appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. Please, let's not fight. Everett, maybe we could wait. The decision's made, Celeste. Dad's tone left no room for argument. The house goes on the market next week. Lorna has 30 days to find new arrangements. I felt something snap inside me. What about me? My voice came out stronger than I expected. This is the only place I feel at home. Dad barely glanced at me. Don't be ridiculous, Rhea. You have a perfectly good home with us. Do I? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Or do I just have a front row seat to the Jasper show? That's enough. Dad's face darkened. This discussion is over. The house is being sold. Aunt Lorna reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. You're right, Everett. This discussion is over. But not in the way you think. She pulled an envelope from her pocket. Mom left me a letter. Did you know she suspected you might try something like this? That's why she had her lawyer draw up a separate document. I have right of first refusal on the house. Dad snatched the paper from her hand, his face growing redder as he read. This is impossible. The estate is more complicated than you thought. Aunt Lorna's smile was razor sharp. You might control the estate, but you can't sell this house without my agreement. And I don't agree. Mom touched Dad's arm. Everett, perhaps we should. No. He crumpled the paper in his fist. This changes nothing. If you want the house, Lorna, you'll have to buy it. Market value. Cash. 30 days. He stormed inside, Mom trailing behind like a shadow. But I stayed on the porch with Aunt Lorna, watching the sun set over Grandma B.A.'s garden. What are you going to do? I asked quietly. Aunt Lorna wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Whatever it takes, little bird. Whatever it takes. But we both knew that even if she found the money, nothing would ever be the same. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was starting to realize which side I was on. The day I chose to leave started like any other. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when Mom walked in, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Your father's bringing potential buyers to see the house tomorrow, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. They're a lovely couple with 3 children. Wouldn't that be nice? I kept writing in my notebook, pressing the pen so hard it nearly tore through the paper. Nice for who? Rhea, please. Your father's doing what he thinks is best for everyone. Everyone except Aunt Lorna. Everyone except me. Mom sighed, that familiar sound of surrender I'd grown to hate. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions. Like choosing one child over the other? The words hung in the air between us. Mom's face crumpled, but before she could respond, Dad burst through the door, Jasper trailing behind him with an ice cream cone. Great news, Dad announced. The business loan came through. We're expanding to 3 new locations by spring. He ruffled Jasper's hair. Ready to learn the ropes, champ? Jasper licked his ice cream, looking uncertain. I guess so. That's my boy. Dad turned to Mom. Did you tell Rhea about tomorrow's showing? I slammed my textbook shut. Yeah, she told me you're selling my grandparents' memories to strangers. Watch your tone, young lady. Dad's voice hardened. This attitude of yours needs to stop. You're acting just like Lorna. Good, I said, standing up. At least someone in this family still knows right from wrong. Rhea. Mom's warning came too late. Dad's face turned red. Go to your room. Now. Why? So you can pretend I don't exist? Like always. That's enough. His fist came down on the table, making Jasper jump and drop his ice cream. I won't have you disrespecting me in my own home. No, I said quietly, surprising myself with how calm I felt. This isn't my home. It never was. I walked upstairs, pulled out my phone, and texted Aunt Lorna. I'm ready. Her response came immediately. Pack what matters. I'll be there in 20. I grabbed my backpack and started filling it with essentials. Grandma's quilt went in first, followed by photos, clothes, and the jar of birthday money I'd been saving. My hands were steady, even though my heart was racing. A soft knock made me freeze. Rhea. It was Jasper. Can I come in? He slipped inside before I could answer, his eyes widening at my half-packed bag. Are you running away? Not running away, I said, folding another shirt. Just choosing a different path. His lower lip trembled. Because of me? I stopped packing and really looked at my little brother. Behind the privilege and the favoritism, he was just a kid caught in Dad's web of expectations, just like me. No, Jasper. Not because of you. I pulled him into a hug. Sometimes people need to leave to find themselves. But I'll always be your sister. He hugged me back fiercely. Promise. Promise. My phone buzzed. Aunt Lorna was outside. I shouldered my backpack and took one last look around my room. Through the window, I could see Dad's prized BMW in the driveway, with its custom plates advertising his repair shops. The sight of it sparked an idea. I grabbed a marker from my desk and scribbled a note. You can't sell memories, Dad. But you can lose them. Downstairs, I could hear Mom and Dad arguing in the kitchen. I slipped out the front door without saying goodbye, leaving my house key on the entry table. Aunt Lorna was waiting in her beat-up Volvo, engine running. As I climbed in, she squeezed my hand. You okay, little bird? I nodded, watching my childhood home shrink in the side mirror. I will be. Your parents. We'll figure it out eventually. Or they won't. I pulled Grandma's quilt tighter around my shoulders. Either way, I'm done being invisible. As we drove away, I felt something shift inside me, not just anger or hurt, but a quiet determination. Dad always said legacy was everything. Well, he was about to learn what happens when you forget that legacy isn't just about what you leave behind, it's about who you leave behind too. Living with Aunt Lorna changed everything. Our small apartment above the bookstore where she worked became my sanctuary, filled with the smell of old paper and coffee. No expectations. No disappointments. Just peace. Until the letter arrived. I was doing homework at the counter when the bell above the door chimed. Mom walked in, looking smaller than I remembered, clutching an envelope. Rhea, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You look different. 6 months had passed since I left. My grades had soared. I cut my hair short, started wearing clothes I actually liked. Found my voice. What do you want? I kept my eyes on my textbook. Your father's expanding again. 3 more shops. She placed the envelope on the counter. He wants Jasper to start training this summer. But Jasper... She paused, twisting her wedding ring. He's refusing. I finally looked up. Good for him. You don't understand. Your father's furious. He's threatening to cut off Jasper's college fund if he doesn't comply. The familiar anger bubbled up. And you're letting him? I thought maybe you could talk to Jasper. He looks up to you even after. After what? After I escaped? After I chose not to be Dad's backup plan? The bell chimed again. Aunt Lorna appeared, carrying a box of new inventory. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Mom. Celeste, this is unexpected. Mom straightened her spine. I'm here about Jasper. Of course you are. Aunt Lorna set down the box. Not about the daughter you let Everett push away. That's not fair. Life rarely is. Aunt Lorna moved behind the counter, standing close to me. How's the house hunting going? Found anyone willing to pay your husband's inflated price? Mom's face flushed. The markets? Complicated. Like your conscience? I opened the envelope Mom had brought. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Dad's business expansion and a note in Jasper's messy handwriting. I can't be him, Rhea. I won't. He's only 12, Mom pleaded. He needs his sister. And where were you when I needed my mother? The words came out sharp enough to make her flinch. I made mistakes. No, I cut her off. Mistakes are forgetting birthdays or missing a school play. You watched Dad erase me and did nothing. Aunt Lorna squeezed my shoulder. I think it's time for you to leave, Celeste. Mom reached for me, but I stepped back. Just think about Jasper. Please. After she left, I stared at the newspaper clipping until the words blurred. Dad's smiling face looked back at me, standing in front of his flagship store. The same expression he wore when he sold my grandparents' house, when he mapped out Jasper's future without asking. You okay, little bird? Aunt Lorna asked. I should help Jasper. Should you? I traced the edge of the clipping. Dad's using him like he tried to use me. As props in his perfect family picture. Then maybe it's time to change the picture. Aunt Lorna pulled something from beneath the counter, a college application. Your test scores came in. Full scholarship potential. You could study business, accounting. Why would I want to study that? Her smile turned sharp. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't running away. It's coming back stronger. I looked at the application, then at Jasper's note. Dad always said legacy was everything. But maybe legacy wasn't just about inheriting a business. Maybe it was about breaking cycles, about being strong enough to write your own story. I'll help Jasper, I said finally. But not by talking him into Dad's plan. By showing him there's another way. Aunt Lorna nodded, understanding lighting her eyes. Your grandmother would be proud. I touched the quilt draped over my chair, thinking of Grandma B.A.'s stories about standing up for what's right. About how sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting back, it's fighting smart. Dad wanted an empire? Fine. But he was about to learn that empires can fall from the inside out. I picked up the college application and started to write. 15 years after my 10th birthday, I stood in front of Parker's Auto Repair, clutching my Master of Business Administration diploma and a stack of financial records that could destroy everything my father had built. The familiar logo, the one he'd chosen over his daughter, was fading in the afternoon sun. I wasn't here for revenge. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Jasper met me outside, looking nothing like the golden child Dad had tried to mold him into. His suit was rumpled, his eyes tired. They don't know I called you, he said quietly. Dad's pride wouldn't let him admit how bad things are. How bad? 6 shops underwater. 2 more about to go under. He ran a hand through his hair. He kept expanding, taking out loans, trying to build this empire for a son who never wanted it. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years studying business, learning every aspect of the industry that had stolen my father's attention. Now I could save his legacy or watch it crumble. The bell chimed as we walked in. Mom was at the counter, looking older than her years. Dad stood by the window, still trying to project strength even as his world collapsed. What is she doing here? His voice was sharp, but I caught the tremor beneath. Helping, Jasper said. Whether you want it or not. I spread the financial records on the counter. You're 3 months from bankruptcy. The new locations are bleeding money, and your accounting practices are. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Let's say creative. You went through my books? Dad's face reddened. You had no right. Like you had no right to sell Grandma's house? To push away everyone who didn't fit your perfect plan? Mom stepped forward. Rhea, please. We're sorry about. This isn't about sorry. I pulled out another document. This is about choices. The same kind you forced on me and Jasper. Dad glanced at the papers, his hand shaking slightly. What are you proposing? I can save the business. My firm specializes in restructuring failing companies. I met his eyes. But there are conditions. Of course there are. He laughed bitterly. The prodigal daughter returns to gloat. No, Jasper cut in. She's here because I asked her. Because while you were building shops for a son who didn't want them, she was building herself into someone stronger than any of us. The silence that followed was heavy with 15 years of unspoken words. I watched Dad's facade crack just slightly as he looked at the empire crumbling around him. Your conditions? He asked finally. I pulled out one last document, the deed to Grandma B.A.'s house. First, you buy back the house. It goes to Aunt Lorna, as it should have years ago. That property's worth. Less than your pride? I interrupted. Choose carefully, Dad. This time, you're not the one holding all the cards. He stared at me for a long moment, really seeing me perhaps for the first time. I waited, feeling the weight of Grandma's quilt around my shoulders even though it was safely at home. And the other conditions? You step down. Let Jasper and me restructure the business our way. You can keep your legacy, but you have to trust us to preserve it. The look on his face, confusion, anger, fear, almost made me falter. Almost made me the invisible daughter again. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Think about it, I said, gathering the papers. You have until tomorrow to decide. Just remember, sometimes saving something means letting go of how you thought it should be. I turned to leave, but Mom's voice stopped me. We missed you, Rhea. Both of you. I looked back at my broken family. The father who couldn't bend, the mother who couldn't stand firm, the brother who found his strength too late. Part of me wanted to help them, to fix everything. But another part knew that some things had to break completely before they could be rebuilt. Tomorrow, I repeated and walked out into the sunlight, leaving them with their choices just as they'd once left me with mine. Dad called at midnight. I'll sign the papers, he said, his voice rough. All of them. The next morning, I walked into Parker's Auto Repair carrying 2 boxes, one filled with legal documents, the other with Grandma B.A.'s quilt. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Dad sat behind his desk, looking smaller than I remembered. Mom stood by the window while Jasper leaned against the wall, watching. The air felt heavy with 15 years of unspoken words. Before we start, Dad said, reaching for the papers, I want to explain. No. I placed both boxes on his desk. First, you need to see something. I opened the second box and pulled out the quilt, spreading it across his desk. The patches of fabric covered his carefully arranged papers, each square telling a story he'd never bothered to hear. This is what legacy looks like, Dad. Not buildings or bank accounts. Stories. Memories. Love. His hands hovered over the quilt, recognition flickering in his eyes. Your grandmother's. The last thing she gave me. While you were buying Jasper that gaming system, she was sewing pieces of my life together. I touched a blue patch. This is from the dress I wore when I won the state math competition. You didn't come. Mom made a small sound like something breaking. And this, I continued, pointing to a yellow square, is from the shirt I wore the day you sold their house. The day you chose your empire over your family. I was trying to build something for all of us, Dad protested, but his voice wavered. No. Jasper stepped forward. You were building something for yourself, using us as excuses. I pulled out the final document, the deed to Grandma's house. Sign it. Dad's hand shook as he reached for the pen. The business will survive. Jasper and I will make sure of it. But not your way. He signed, the scratch of pen on paper loud in the quiet room. Mom wiped tears from her cheeks, and for once she didn't try to smooth things over. There's something else, I said, reaching into my bag. I found this while going through the business records. I placed a faded envelope on top of the quilt. Dad's name was written in Grandma Bea's handwriting. Where did you? It was in her desk at the house. The one you sold without clearing out her things. His hands trembled as he opened it. A single sheet of paper fell out along with a key. Dear Everett, he read aloud, if you're reading this, you're probably about to make a terrible mistake. The house isn't just property, it's the heart of this family. Key enclosed opens a safe in the study. Inside, you'll find something more valuable than any business, the truth about what really matters. The letter slipped from his fingers. I never knew, because you never looked. I stood up, gathering the signed papers. The house goes back to Aunt Lorna tomorrow. The business restructuring starts next week. Your choice now is simple. Be part of the rebuilding or stay trapped in the ruins of what you thought mattered. And if I choose wrong again? His voice was barely a whisper. I touched the quilt one last time. Then you'll have to live with that choice. Just like I've lived with yours. As I turned to leave, Mom stepped forward. The quilt. Will you leave it? I looked at the fabric spread across Dad's desk. 15 years of memories he'd ignored, now impossible to miss. No, I said quietly. But I'll bring it back when you've earned the right to see the stories it tells. I walked out into the sunlight, leaving them with the weight of their choices and the key to a truth they should have known all along. Sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what you build, but what you're willing to rebuild. Behind me, I heard Dad start to cry. 1 year later, I stood in Grandma Bea's garden, watching Aunt Lorna plant lavender. The old house looked different now, restored, alive, filled with the warmth I remembered from childhood. They're here, Jasper called from the porch. I straightened up, brushing dirt from my knees. Mom and Dad's car pulled into the driveway, moving slowly like they weren't sure they belonged. Maybe they didn't, not yet. But they were trying. Ready, little bird? Aunt Lorna asked, squeezing my shoulder. I nodded, touching the quilt draped over the porch swing. Today felt right for its return. Dad looked older, softer somehow. The business restructuring had worked. 3 shops instead of 8, focused on quality over empire. Jasper managed one while I handled the finances. Dad worked the counter at the original location, learning to listen to customers' stories instead of just fixing their cars. We found something, Mom said by way of greeting, holding out a dusty box. In the safe. The one from Grandma Bea's letter. Inside was a collection of photographs I'd never seen. Me at school events, award ceremonies, quiet moments in the garden, all captured by Grandma B without anyone knowing. And beneath them, a letter addressed to me. Read it, Aunt Lorna urged gently. My hand shook as I unfolded the paper. My dearest Rhea, I read aloud, if you're reading this, then everything has either fallen apart or come together. Sometimes they're the same thing. The quilt I made you isn't just memories, it's a map. Each patch shows a moment when you were stronger than anyone knew. Keep adding to it. Your story isn't finished just because others stopped reading. Dad made a sound like pain. She knew. All along, she knew what I was doing to this family. Yes, Aunt Lorna said simply. But she also knew Rhea would find her way back. Not to what was broken, but to what could be rebuilt. I spread the quilt across the porch railing, its patches catching the afternoon light. The new squares had been added over the year, Pieces of my business suits, Jasper's college graduation tie, even a snippet from Mom's gardening apron. I have something too, Dad said quietly, pulling out a familiar key. The safe had 2 compartments. This opens the second one. Inside, we found Grandma B.A.'s journal, filled with stories about our family, not just the happy moments but the hard ones too. The last entry was dated just before the accident. Love isn't always enough, I read, but it's always a place to start. The real legacy isn't in buildings or businesses, but in the courage to rebuild what matters most. Mom stepped forward hesitantly. We've been thinking. The apartment above the original shop is empty. If you wanted a place in town for when you're working. I looked at Aunt Lorna, who nodded encouragingly. Maybe, I said. One step at a time. Later, as the sun set, we sat on the porch, the broken family slowly mending, the chosen family who'd never left. Dad ran his fingers over the quilt's patches, learning the stories he'd missed. Mom and Aunt Lorna shared gardening tips, their awkwardness giving way to cautious warmth. Jasper nudged my shoulder. Think Grandma B planned all this? The letters, the safe, the timing? I smiled, remembering her words about stories not being finished. I think she gave us the pieces. We had to figure out how to stitch them together. The lavender swayed in the evening breeze, its scent mixing with memories both old and new. Some wounds would never fully heal, and some trust might never fully return. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the real legacy was learning that family, like quilts, could be both cherished and changed, preserved and added to, broken and beautiful all at once. I touched the empty space at the quilt's edge, ready for whatever story came next.